The first episode of True Detective Night Country had a lot going on, and I assumed a portion of it was background information that would serve to introduce us to the strange location that is Ennis, Alaska. Because the case was new, it was hard to figure out what would be essential for figuring out how the researchers from Tsalal ended up in the ice. Surely in a story that courts the supernatural, you should expect some bits and pieces that are misleading and some red herrings. Enter episode 2, which is a packed hour of television where everything seems important. This makes sense because it's the episode where they start to dig into the case and do the detective work that leads them to consider that there may be a killer, and it introduces this clever device of people asking the wrong questions. It also gave us the Corpsicle, which is easily my favorite thing that's happened to TV so far this year, beyond one of Liz's underlings snapping off the arm of the only survivor in this human ice sculpture, which added a real sense of horror. Everything about this was working for me, including Pete's plan to move it by wrapping it in a tarp and rolling it through town on a flatbed, and the idea they have to let it thaw for 2 days in the middle of the local ice rink. There are some details here like running out into the ice and snow without shoes and the paradoxical undressing that are directly influenced by the 1950s Dyatlov Pass incident where 9 hikers died under mysterious circumstances in the Ural Mountains. This is something I spent a fair amount of time researching this week and think it's probably best not to go too deep down that rabbit hole. But I will say this is something that Issa López cites as an inspiration for the story, and that theories about what happened there range from Yeti attack, UFOs, military tests, a katabatic wind event, to infrasound, which is a natural event that can produce panic attacks. What I'm trying to say is that the details of the case are so strange that it's fertile ground for wild speculation. In recent years, the official cause of death has been changed to be the result of an avalanche, which seems rational, but since it doesn't answer every question, it probably doesn't satisfy people who have been invested in the alternate explanations. So what are the right questions to be asking for Night Country? Probably whatever Danvers is asking. Episode 2 fleshed out some of what she's up against without glossing over the fact that she's the cause of a lot of her problems. But as is the custom with detectives in this series, despite her faults, she knows how to work a case. And she has her appetites, which in a small town like Ennis makes for a lot of uncomfortable situations. Episode 1 made me wonder about the history she had with particular people, including Hank, but episode 2 cleared things up, which I appreciated. And I also liked how they went back to fill in the blanks on other questions they expect viewers who are watching closely to be asking. Why the hell didn't the delivery driver mention that he saw someone in the hall at Tsalal? Thanks for asking. It was because people who live in Ennis think it's pretty normal to see ghosts during the long stretches of darkness. Why does Liz hate twist and shout so much, and so on? Answering these questions is promising because I know people talk about season 1 like it was the perfect season of TV now, but my memory of watching it live was that a lot of people got caught up in the mysteries and then were let down by the finale. Not to say that that was the right reaction, but it was a thing that happened, and it's probably a road that they don't want to go down. It makes me think of Lost and how it made sense that its creators didn't really anticipate the way people would obsess over every detail in that show. And this is something Pizzolatto expressed after the finale aired. He was surprised that fans would focus so much on the Yellow King details. But all these years later, if you're going to lean in on some out there mysteries, you better have a good reason and a plan for how things will be revealed. The attention to detail is helping me because the one area where I was a little concerned was all the overt connections to season 1. Travis being Russ's dad was something I joked about at the end of last week's video, and I was kind of shocked to find out that was the case. I mean, there's a part of me that gets excited because I like Russ Cohle as a character, and I remember him mentioning that he went to live in Alaska with his dad, but then there's the other part of me who wants there to be a good reason to add a detail like that. This one felt borderline, because mostly it's a throwaway line about his childhood, so you could almost let it go just because it's fun. I had mostly come around on it, but one of the details I'd started to fixate on was the funding for Tsalal. So when Pete tells Liz that it can be traced back to Tuttle United, I started to worry that they might be laying it on too thick. For now, I'm willing to give them the benefit of the doubt because the first 2 episodes don't seem to be lacking in vision, and also because there's still that other part of me that got excited because I know that name. If it's not a name that jumped out at you, Billy Lee Tuttle was a character who showed up in a couple of episodes in the first season, whose powerful family was behind the cult that was the focus of Rust and Marty's investigation. They used their influence to cover up their involvement with the crimes and their relation to the season's big bad, Errol, who was the illegitimate grandson of Billy's father, Sam Tuttle. So if you've never seen the first season, they were a family who were into all sorts of bad stuff like rape and murder of children, and at the same time well respected, with one cousin serving as a Louisiana senator. A detail that jumped out at me in this episode was that you could see the dates on the email exchange with the tattoo artist, which confirms that the story starts in December 2023. The finale of season 1 happened in 2012 in the shared timeline, and by then, most of the key family members, including Billy Lee, who were implicated in the evidence Rust uncovered, were dead. That information was released to the news agencies, but the news report covering them indicated that the state attorney general and FBI discredited rumors that the Tuttle family were related to Errol, and there was no mention of a connection to the haunting video that Rust found in Tuttle's safe. But to get back to the episode at hand, we've got ourselves an investigation, and we also have a police department that may not be up to the task. They don't even have a forensic technician, so Danvers is probably right to call it a shitbowl. But because of her history with Captain Connelly, she doesn't want to send it to Anchorage. As she's examining the bodies with Pete, they list off the strange injuries such as burnt corneas, ice burns, ruptured eardrums, a spiral on a forehead that we'll come back to. And why are they naked? The rest of her crew are taking selfies and getting a little too close with the chainsaw, which leads to a meltdown where she yells at them to at least pretend like they know what they're doing. One of the crew still accidentally snaps off the director's arm, like I mentioned, and when he starts to howl in pain, they realize that he's not dead. His being alive out on the ice that long seems inexplicable, and I'm not sure if that's supposed to be a clue about something related to the research they're conducting, or if it's just supposed to be a weird thing that could possibly happen. Later, as Liz goes to the high school to find out more about what they were studying out there, she finds out from the nurse at the hospital that Lund is going into surgery to have one of his legs amputated, and they won't be able to talk to him anytime soon because he's in an induced coma. So they do have a potential witness to what happened, but it'll be a while before they can talk to him. Danvers does talk to the science teacher, who is also an ex-lover because, as I said, she has her appetites, and he refers to the researchers as madmen. Not only were they reclusive, but they didn't even rotate their crews like most Arctic research stations do. They spent decades trying to sequence the DNA of an extinct microorganism that could potentially stop cellular decay. He thinks the work that they were doing could cure cancer, autoimmune diseases, and genetic disorders, and be an absolute game changer. He also explained how difficult the extraction process was, and in his mind it was never going to work. But I'd say it's at least a possibility that whatever they're researching out there might have something to do with how the director was still alive. Liz gets called back to the station where Captain Connelly is waiting, and he tells her they're taking the bodies to Anchorage. He's another one of those details I was hoping they would explain. In the first episode, when Navarro is in Liz's office, she takes a picture off the wall and asks how Daddy Connelly is treating her. In this scene, we find out how she ended up in Ennis, and if you couldn't tell by her tone, she doesn't agree with the official story of being sent there to handle unique issues that arise in an isolated community during the sunless season. She thinks of it more as a banishment. She finds a loophole to keep the case. Frozen bodies are not to be manipulated beyond the absolutely imperative until properly thawed at a constant temperature of 38 degrees, or the forensic results will be compromised and useless in court. The process takes 48 hours, so that buys her some time. When he asks where she would even put them, it cuts to a scene at the local hockey rink. There she brushes off Leah except to give her a disappointed look when she sees her girlfriend, because she's there to see the manager. She works for the mine and the mine owns the rink, which may turn out to be an important detail. But the big news here is, you guessed it, Danvers has a history with her as well, or in this case with her husband, who she slept with before they got divorced. Still, she agrees to let them use the rink, and from there, the Corpsicle has a home. While Navarro was stuck on the sidelines on the ice, Rose told her to come by and see her, and she does. She asked her about seeing Travis, and that's where we get confirmation that he was Rust's father. I brought up that the references to Alaska were almost throwaways, but I guess I should also mention that at the end, when he tells Marty he shouldn't be there, he mentioned he felt pieces of his father along with his daughter when he almost died. Rose says that Travis had leukemia and wanted to die on his own terms. He came to visit her and they spent one last night together, and then he killed himself by going into the ice. Evangeline was the one that found his body, so that's how she met Rose. She talks about seeing him as if it's not out of the ordinary to see and interact with the dead. He was the first dead person she's seen, but she knows people that were born with the ability and that it happens around Ennis all the time. Her theory is that the world is getting old and Ennis is where the fabric of all things is coming apart at the seams. And it's a nice touch that she says all of this before she lights up her joint. For her, the question isn't if you can talk to the dead. The right question is, what does the dead want? She tells her that some of them come and visit because they miss you. Some come because they need to tell you something that you need to hear. And some of them just want to take you with them, and that you need to know the difference. On the way out, she asked Navarro if she saw the spiral on his forehead, and Evangeline says she's seen it before years ago. Rose draws it in the snow and says it's old, and then wipes it away like she doesn't want it to be there any longer than it needs to be. She says it's older than Ennis, it's older than the ice probably. The spiral is another connection to the first season, where it showed up on the first victim's back and became a recurring image related to the cult imagery. I thought about doing a separate video on this because it makes an appearance in the third season as well, but when I was looking into it, there isn't a ton to say. It's a mystery, and in a way, Rose's explanation is one of the more direct attempts to explain it, and it's pretty vague. It was a sign of the cult that the Tuttle family was behind, but it also appeared in nature, which added a sense of it being something bigger than that, which led to a lot of the supernatural speculation. This was echoed in episode 1 of Night Country, when the photos Danvers was looking at took on the shape of a spiral when viewed from above. All that's to say, the jury is still out on how the spiral connects the different seasons, and that gets more complicated when we get into Clark and Annie's connection to it in a bit. Evangeline tells her that her sister sees people following her, and Rose tells her not to confuse the spirit world with mental health issues, which serves to clarify that Rose isn't insane. And there we get a better explanation about why her sister doesn't want to go to a hospital. Back at the rink, Pete notices teeth marks. It looks like they bit their own hands, and Liz wants to check and see if there are any other cases with similar injuries. There are 5 heads and 9 feet, so they believe the rest are buried. Director Lund is at the hospital, so his head makes 6, which means 2 are missing. When Pete asks why they're climbing on top of each other, it's like something was chasing them. She says it's not Yetis. Hypothermia can cause delirium. They panic and then they freeze. Navarro arrives to show Danvers a picture of the spiral. It was on Annie's body and it was on the forehead, so for her this is the same case. But at this point, Liz is not ready to work with her. Before she leaves, Navarro points out that no one likes her except for Pete, and she'll be breaking his heart soon. And we do see hints of that when she demands he stay to watch the bodies rather than going home to be with his son. Not before they ran out or after. No one stops to draw on their own forehead while they're freezing to death, so if it was after, somebody else was out there with them. The clothes that Navarro saw folded neatly off to the side don't match the bodies. There are only 5 pairs of pants, and 3 shoes are missing. So the right question here is, how scared do you have to be to run out on the ice without any shoes? This scene was a bit of fresh air, considering that the previous seasons have had elements of the supernatural, but the killers were always real people in the end. Pete doesn't think the folded clothes make sense, but Liz, who is convinced that there are rational explanations for everything, insists it does make sense, they're just not seeing it. In other words, they're not asking the right questions. They leave because they get word that the delivery guy and the cleaning ladies are ready to be interviewed. Before they go, Pete finds the cooking video that the Spanish scientist was making after unlocking his phone with his frozen face, and they see Clark shaking and saying she's awake. Liz goes to see the cleaning ladies, one of whom is the woman who hit the abuser on the head with the metal bucket in episode 1. She says she goes there twice a month, and Liz asks if she ever saw Annie K there, which she hadn't, and she asks why would she be there when she was a midwife. She shows her the spiral, which she's never seen, but she also shows it to the other woman, the one who was beaten up in the first episode, and I don't think that you can see her have a strange reaction to it, but it does seem weird to include her in this scene, so I'm not sure that's the last time we'll see her. The other cleaner says that the guys were quiet and played video games, but they were also obsessed with their work. The delivery guy tells Pete that they were weirdos, and Clark seems to stand out as a weirdo among the weirdos. And in his opinion, he seemed to be getting worse lately, talking to himself, staring into nothing, hanging out naked. In short, he doesn't think he was right. The cleaning lady says he would stay locked in his room where she heard him crying, and that she thought it was sad that the other guys just ignored him. As I mentioned, the driver does say that he thought he saw someone, but then changes his tune, saying this is Ennis. Yeah, you see people sometimes, know what I mean? He has a similar view to Rose, that sometimes you just see dead people, and when Pete asked him about the spiral, he said Clark had it tattooed on him. Evangeline goes to Kavik's burger joint where she sees her sister, but she's really there to talk to Annie's brother. She shows him a picture of Clark, and he says that he doesn't recognize him. While they're talking, his coworker comes out and tries to break up the conversation. He doesn't want him to talk to Evangeline because of what happened at the mine. In the process of that, he looks at the picture of Clark and it looks like he knows him. But then he denies it, and at the same time, a commotion breaks out inside and distracts them. A fight has broken out because of what the mine is doing to the water. The guy says they're poisoning their kids, and the shady friend, who we'll find out is named Clark, storms out after saying the mine pays for everything, including the schools. So the mine continues to be this force lurking behind the scenes, and with Rose's suggestion that they're in an area where the world is coming apart as it seems, the idea of extracting things from below the ground sounds a little more ominous. Since we watched Danvers and Navarro come together because of the case by the end of the episode, I think it's noticeable how differently they spend their time away from work in the lead up to that. Evangeline spends time with her sister, taking Rose's suggestion to heart and trying to get her to consider getting help. She gets nowhere with Jules, and she doesn't try to force her. She opens up to Kavik, and we see more of the playful side of their relationship and that there is more behind her tough exterior. Liz, on the other hand, sticks to herself, and when Pete tries to get her to open up about what happened between her and Navarro, she just tells him not to worry. If he doesn't mess up, he has nothing to worry about. Liz can't get Leah to help with the Christmas tree, not just because she wants to sneak out to meet her girlfriend, but also because she doesn't want to be around her with everything that's happening between them. While Liz is doing that, she searches a box for an extension cord and finds the polar bear stuffed animal. Then we see a flashback of her listening to Twist and Shout, lying on the floor with her son Holden. This gives us insight into why she pushes people away, and why she might need help from someone like Navarro to get past herself. Her inflexibility helps to point things in the right direction of figuring out what really happened, but Evangeline's openness towards the local customs and culture and the supernatural will probably come in handy. Just how closed off Liz is comes out when she freaks out on Pete's wife and grandmother when Leah wants to see how the tribal markings would look on her chin. Like, Liz is always a little wrong in how she interacts with people, but her reaction here is on a different level. And it's kind of a low point for the character and makes you wonder what her aversion to this is. And when Navarro goes to question Clark, we see her find a gold chain when she drops her phone on the floor that gives her a flashback to her mother wailing while wearing it. This is from when they were kids, and when she almost gets in an accident, she throws it out of her window. She gets to Chuck's place and lets him know that she thinks he's lying about knowing Clark. She threatens to arrest him for skipping out on the check at Kavik's, and he admits that Clark bought his cousin's trailer, a Golden Eagle. He paid $10,000 in cash about 7 years ago. When she asks why he lied at first, he says it's because he doesn't like her. But she thinks it's because he didn't like Annie, and that he's okay with what happened to her. And it's probably a bit of both. Pete lets Liz know about Tsalal's funding. As mentioned, he traced it back to a shell company that belongs to Tuttle United, which, other than being connected to the sex cult in the first season, is into everything including glass, tech, video games, palm oil, and cruise lines. He mentions the spiral tattoo and that Clark's mom in Ireland hadn't talked to him in 10 years, and that he was dead to her. Later, after she finds the polar bear, she finds a piece of paper with the same spiral on it, and it gives her an idea. She calls him again and has him send her Clark's credit history. A little earlier, when Hank was texting his online sweetheart and agreeing to send her more money for her mother's medication, he realized that Annie K's files were missing and that Pete took them. He heads over and slaps his son in the face and tells him not to go into his house to steal. He adds that even his mother didn't steal from them when she left, and that Danvers doesn't own him. He's her family, she's not, and blood is blood. After fighting him tooth and nail to keep the case earlier, Danvers, who is still reeling from her Holden flashback, goes to see Connelly to blow off some steam. And we get a sex scene that is unexpectedly hot, but also another interesting contrast between Navarro and Danvers. With Kovic in the last episode, he was trying to slow things down so he wouldn't climax, and Evangeline kept going. In this scene, Connolly is about to go, and Danvers does everything possible to slow him down so that she can finish. This is clearly something that we're supposed to pick up on after the surprise of seeing two actors that are pushing 60 simulating very believable hotel room sex. I've been thinking about what this means for the past couple of days, and the best I've come up with is how they choose to use their aggression. Or I guess in Liz's case, when she decides to drop hers and work together with someone. For Navarro, it revealed something off-putting about her, that she'll push people around to get something she wants. And so for Danvers, it shows that she can connect with people and meet them where they are when she needs to. Either way, I'm all for it. It's HBO and it's True Detective, so it wouldn't be right if there wasn't some sex. I hope when I hit 60, I'm still looking at tables like that and thinking of possibilities when I walk into a new hotel room. And there are some other character details here as well. Danvers and Connelly have been on and off for 19 years, and they first got together when she was on a break with Leah's father, Jake. He's married, which seems to be a pattern for her. He has legitimate concerns about the Tsalal case turning into a disaster, and asks why she's really fighting him to keep it. When he goes a step further and says he thinks she can't do it, she gets pissed. And when he starts down the road of threats, she storms out. She gets Clark's credit records when she returns to the car, and the right question here is not why did he get the tattoo, but when, and she calls the artist who remembers him. He got the tattoo April 22nd, 2017, and we know he bought the trailer about a year before that. The artist sends Liz a photo of the tattoo, and says she's sending one of the models she used for the work, but we don't see that photo at first, just her shocked reaction. Navarro comes home to find Danvers waiting inside her place. The picture was of Annie and Clark together. They're in an embrace. She has her shirt off so you can see her tattoo. And we find out that he got his 4 days after she died. Also, the DNA is back and it was her tongue at Tsalal. The tissue has some unusual cellular damage, possibly from freezing. So he probably was holding on to that in the freezer there. There's an interesting moment here where Liz starts to put her groceries away and asks if she moved where she put the cans, which makes it sound like she spent a lot of time in her house in the past. It's not where do you put your cans, it's I see that you're not putting the cans in the same place you used to. Back when Evangeline was Danvers' Pete before Pete, there must have been a different level of intimacy between them. Regardless, she's at the point now where she's willing to say that their cases are the same and asks Navarro if she wants in, saying that she knows Annie better than anything she'll get from the files. Of course, she does want in. She pushes back briefly, asking if it's only important now because it's a bunch of white guys, but she pretty much backs off immediately from that. Then she mentions something she refers to as the Wheeler thing, and before she can continue, Liz straight cuts her off, tells her to shut up. She tries to continue, saying we did exactly what we needed to do, and Liz will not hear about it. She says they need each other for this one thing. They're going to crack it, they're going to close Navarro's case, close Danvers' case, and then that's it for them. Meanwhile, we see Leah come over to the ice rink where she notices Pete's face. He's got a pretty good mark on it, and she calls Hank an animal, which would indicate there's a history of abuse. Pete brushes that off by saying his dad was raised by an animal to be an animal, which leads to her telling him about better times when Liz and her dad loved to dance together. Her dad was a stoner and wannabe artist, and he was so chill, she says, and also that she's pretty sure that Liz used to smoke weed too. Pete talks about how Hank used to play guitar in a band, but that he's never heard him play, which is kind of sad. His mom told him him that he wasn't good enough to have a career, but then again, she kind of felt he wasn't good enough for anything, which is supported by her eventually leaving him. He says that sticks with you, doesn't it? Not being good enough. And while this all is just a bit of extra character detail, that saying seems like something that might come up again as well. After Navarro surprises Kavik after telling him she wasn't coming by and finds out that he's not up to another round because he took care of himself, they talk and she tells him that Liz wants her on the case. Only at this point she doesn't feel like she has anything to add. She thought she knew everything about Annie, but she didn't know about the Clark thing. They kept that a secret, and why they did that isn't the right question. How is? This leads her to figuring out that the trailer was the way to keep their relationship a secret. That leads them to the Nook, which is where you'd put your trailer if you wanted to use it for low-key rendezvous. She has to get more unhinged as it goes, and the phrase, her eyes, her face, is repeated, and I'm resisting an urge here to obsess over everything else it says. Because the point seems to be that it all looks to be of a piece with what they find inside the trailer. There are handmade figures and dolls everywhere that are very season 1-y, along with seal and caribou bones. More scrawling on the walls. Annie's phone is there with a layer of dust on it that appears to cover everything inside. And behind the curtain we see the spiral on the ceiling, and a life-size doll who you'd have to imagine is symbolic of Annie, with a smaller doll next to her that looks like it's supposed to be her child, which is something that hasn't been mentioned about Annie before. There are a ton of pictures on the wall that the internet doesn't believe are all of Annie K. That's a rabbit hole I'll stay out of for now, because as much as this seemed like the perfect place to cut to black, the episode isn't over. Pete calls and says there's a problem. Then there is this spooky transition with someone yelling over images of a ram's head on a barrel and a dead bird hanging upside down, which might be related to where Clark is now, because when they get back to the ice rink, Pete tells them that there are only 6 bodies and he's the one who's missing. Liz tries to suggest he might have gotten separated from the others, but Navarro is sure he's alive, which would make a lot more sense and provide an explanation for who wrote "We're all dead" on the whiteboard and who the delivery driver saw in the hall. In the episode proper, it's just a flash, but in the preseason teaser, it's pretty clear that the person is wearing Annie's parka, and it's been established that Clark was wearing that on the night the others went missing. And the revelation that he's still out there sets up a really cool shot of the camera pulling away from what looks more and more like a macabre statue now that it's melting, and it all makes for a good closing shot. Beyond some of the concerns I brought up about the supernatural and the season 1 connections in the beginning, which to be clear never elevated to things that took me out of it, I enjoyed this episode a lot. The character development has been on the level that I've come to expect, and they found ways to keep it interesting. As far as interacting with the dead and the more overt use of the supernatural, one thing that always comes to mind for me in this kind of situation is that on some level, it doesn't matter if it's really happening, if the characters believe it. The belief is what drives their decisions. So regardless of whether Ennis is really a place where reality is altered because the world is coming apart at its seams or not, people are going to act differently and process things they experience through that lens. With the attention to detail I mentioned earlier, and the solid characters who are capable of being surprising, there is plenty to keep it grounded. Plus, this is a tight 6 episodes, not a sprawling multi-season affair. So I expect if the idea they're working towards lands, it'll all work out in the end. And I think that's a great place to leave things. Please like this video if you enjoyed it. Please subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. And thanks for watching. I'll talk to you soon.